Holiday had seen plenty of strange things in his years as a long-haul trucker, but nothing compared to the night he picked up a hitchhiker on Route 66. The summer air should have been sweltering, yet an unnatural chill clung to the lonely highway. The only sounds were the hum of his engine and the rhythmic thump of tires against the asphalt. The night was eerily still, and the stars overhead glowed like distant, watchful eyes. He had driven this road countless times before, but something about this particular night felt wrong. An oppressive silence pressed against him, making his skin crawl. Around 2 a.m., in the middle of nowhere, his headlights caught a lone figure standing by the roadside. The man wore a thick jacket despite the heat and raised his thumb in the universal hitchhiker's gesture. Mike had learned to avoid picking up strangers, but something about this man made him hesitate. Against his better judgment, he eased off the gas and pulled over. As the hitchhiker approached, Mike's gut twisted. There was something off about him, his posture, his heavy, deliberate steps. But most unsettling were his eyes, dark, hollow, devoid of life. The man said nothing as he climbed into the passenger seat. Mike swallowed hard and tried to focus on the road, but the silence felt suffocating. He could feel the man's presence, yet there was no rustling of fabric, no sound of breath. It was as if he wasn't really there. After what felt like an eternity, Mike finally worked up the courage to speak. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The hitchhiker didn't answer. Instead, he slowly lifted a bony finger and pointed ahead. Mike followed his gaze, eyes straining in the darkness until they settled on an abandoned building in the distance. It loomed against the horizon, a decayed remnant of something long forgotten. A chill ran down Mike's spine. Something about that place filled him with dread. He turned to ask his passenger another question, but the seat was empty. His pulse spiked as he slammed on the brakes and frantically scanned the cab. No sign of the man. The air felt thick and heavy, pressing in on him like an unseen force. The next day, unable to shake the eerie encounter, Mike returned to the building. Its crumbling facade looked exactly as it had in the dark, abandoned and lifeless. A plaque by the entrance caught his eye. The faded engraving read, "Site of the 1982 Highway 66 crash in memory of the lost souls." His blood ran cold. He vaguely remembered hearing about the tragic accident that had claimed several lives that night. One name surfaced in his mind, Jared Stevens, a young trucker who had lost control of his rig and crashed into this very building. Mike's breath hitched. The hitchhiker had led him to his final resting place. Mike never drove that stretch of road again. But even years later, he couldn't shake the memory of those lifeless eyes, watching, waiting, just beyond the veil of darkness. Henry Donovan had been driving for over 10 hours when exhaustion began creeping in. The road stretched endlessly through the backwoods of Maine, a winding path of cracked asphalt leading into the night. The cab of his truck felt stiflingly small, the steady hum of the engine the only sound accompanying him. Needing a break, Jerry pulled into a nearly empty roadside diner. The flickering neon sign cast a sickly glow over the cracked pavement. Inside, only a few weary truckers nursed their coffee. He ordered a burger and fries, eating in silence as the rain began to patter against the window. When he finally climbed back into his rig, an uneasy sensation settled over him. It felt as if someone was watching. Brushing it off as exhaustion, he started the engine and eased back onto the road. But the feeling didn't fade. At first it was subtle, a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision, a shadow shifting just beyond the reach of his headlights. His eyes darted to the side, but there was nothing. Just the empty highway. He wiped his brow, glancing at the passenger seat. It was empty, and yet, the presence remained. He turned up the radio to drown out his nerves, but the static only deepened his unease. When he finally stopped at a rest area, relief flooded him. But as he reached for his jacket, his hand froze. On the seat beside him was a damp, icy handprint. A shiver ran through him. He hadn't picked up anyone. He had been alone, and yet someone had been sitting right there next to him. He leapt out of the cab, his boots splashing against the wet pavement, but there was no one in sight. No footprints, nothing but the lingering impression of fingers pressed into the seat. Jerry never stopped at that diner again. But he knew whatever had ridden with him that night was still out there, waiting for its next ride. Mary pulled her rig into a desolate truck stop just past midnight. The buzzing neon sign flickered above the convenience store, casting an eerie light over the empty lot. A heavy silence hung in the air, making the place feel forgotten by the rest of the world. She was exhausted. The road had been endless, and she needed to rest. Inside the store, she grabbed a bottle of water and some chips, paying little attention to her surroundings, until she noticed the man sitting in the corner. His eyes were locked onto her, unblinking, studying. Not with admiration, nor idle curiosity, but with something predatory, a slow, calculating gaze that made her skin crawl. Swallowing her unease, she paid for her things and left quickly, locking her truck's doors the moment she got inside. She tried to sleep, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave her. Hours later, a noise jerked her awake. The faint creak of footsteps circling her rig. Her breath hitched. Then came another sound, a slow, scraping metal on metal. Summoning her courage, she peeked out the window. There he was, the man from the store. Standing by her truck, a glint of steel in his hand, a knife. Panic surged through her. Fumbling with the keys, she jammed them into the ignition, the truck roaring to life. Slamming it into reverse, she tore out of the lot, tires screeching on the wet pavement. She didn't dare look back. At the next town, she reported the incident. The clerk's expression darkened. "You're not the first," he muttered. "Truckers disappear here. Some don't come back." Lisa shuddered, realizing just how close she had come to vanishing into the night. She never stopped there again. But she knew, somewhere in the shadowed corners of the road, that man was still waiting, his knife glinting under the neon glow, searching for his next victim.